guys have all of your investment eggs in one basket, the Australian basket, then maybe you should rethink that. The Australian market is but a small percentage of the total worldwide market. Do you want to have all your risk in one country? And it's not being seditious or trying to get you to be traitors to your own country. For heaven's sake, I encourage Americans to invest down here. There's probably more money coming in here than would ever go out. I would strongly encourage you to look at all your financing options. So one of the whinging questions I get is, where I come from, you won't get a 70 or 80% mortgage. Look around, shop around. And if they don't give it to you, does that stop you from buying it for zero down? Of course not, folks. How else could you buy real estate without putting any cash in yourself? Do you think it's possible? Of course it is. How would you do it? Use your equity in your own home. That's possible, isn't it? Let's say you've got a home here in Sydney, it's worth $500,000, you've got a $300,000 mortgage. Could you borrow another $50,000 against your own home to help buy an investment property? Of course you can. Is mortgage interest on your own home tax deductible? It's not, right? But if you take out an extra $50,000 to buy an investment property, is the mortgage interest on that $50,000 tax deductible? Sure it is. So you win all round. So you can do all of these things. Not only that, it's surprisingly simple. So you can use the equity in your own home. What else could you do to buy a property without using any of your own money? An IOU. From whom? Vendor, exactly. Ask the seller, are you willing to leave in $60,000? Do you think they're going to laugh at you? Some will. But think of it this way. You've got an elderly couple, they've raised 5 kids, they've got a 6-bedroom home. It's too much for them to manage. It's gone up in value enormously. It's now worth $1.2 million. They are downsizing. They're buying a nice little apartment. It's worth only $800,000. That leaves $400,000 cash left over. What are they going to do with that money? So you come along and say, all right, well, I'll buy your property. However, I'd like you to leave $300,000 in, and I'm willing to pay 6% interest for however many years, 5 years. They're comparing that with the measly amount of money they'd get by having it in the bank. They're likely to say to you, $300,000, are you sure you don't want $400,000? Some people relish the thought of still having some ownership of the property they've lived in for 40 years. So ask. If you don't ask, you'll never find out. If you find a deal tomorrow, it's on the market at $1 million, it's worth $3 million. You don't have $1 million. Could you buy it? What would you do to buy it? Well, you could try the banks. What if the bank said no? What would you do? Yes, sir. Get some money from a friend. Do you think you'd find friends who'd be willing to go house with you on a deal? You put up the money, you get half the profit. There's $2 million profit in it. Is that possible? Of course. Again, you're limited by your imagination. And the thing is, I don't want you to just sit there and say, oh, that might work, or that's possible. Start dreaming up your own ideas. Run an ad in the paper. Terrific deal found, wanted, equity partner. You might get 20 phone calls, of which 3 are real contenders to be a partner because they've got the money. Do you think there are people out there with a lot of money who don't have any business sense as to what to do with it? Of course there are. Again, if you have a track record of looking after them really well, in other words, don't be too mean, don't try and get it all for yourself. If you make great investments for them, not only are they likely to invest more money with you, they'll refer their friends to you. It's just common sense. Have you ever seen billboards or advertisements on radio, television saying, hey, do you want to buy antiques or gold or platinum or baseball cards or maybe fancy furniture? Do you want to invest in all these sorts of things? We will lend you the money to do it. Doesn't happen, does it? But all over the world, banks will lend you money to buy real estate. That tells you 2 crucial things about real estate. Firstly, it's a very safe and secure investment. And secondly, and most importantly, and we come to this point again and again, you don't even need the money to buy it. I can't emphasize that point enough. You are a deal maker. You put things together on paper and you find a way of making it work. How can you make deals work? I came across a funeral parlor. Now, a funeral parlor doesn't sound very interesting. In fact, if I tell you that a funeral parlor has a viewing room and a slumber room and a chilling room, no marks for guessing what they keep cold in there, folks, and a mortuary with channels in the ground to let the fluids flow out. All right, it was empty. It had been empty for 3 or 4 years. What would you do with a funeral parlor? Turn it into a restaurant? Yuck. So what I did is I got someone to phone every funeral director in the country and say, hey, how would you like to move into this city? And most of them said, you've got to be kidding, and hung up, or said nothing and hung up. But one of them said, you know what, I've always wanted to move into that city. What's the deal? I said, well, there's this building available, why don't you go and buy it? And why would I offer that, by the way? I didn't want a tenant who begrudged the fact that I'd beat him to this property. He said, no, I'm a funeral director. I don't want to be my own landlord. I'd want someone else to own it. I said, right, we can do a deal. I said, how about we sign up a heads of agreement whereby, subject to me buying it, you agree to become my tenant at this amount per year and all that sort of thing. He said, hang on a minute, Sonny Jim, not so fast now. He said, I'll only do it if you give me a long-term lease. I said, how long do you want? He said, I'd only consider it if you give me 10 years plus a right of renewal for another 10 years. I said, you know what? We can talk. We can do business. So I signed him up on this heads of agreement. I went back to the sellers. The property had gone up for auction and it failed to reach the reserve price of $195,000. So I was in a strong position. I had a tenant willing to pay $30,000 a year and a seller who had an empty building that he couldn't find many uses for, and it got passed in at auction. To keep the story short, we ended up doing the deal at $170,000. I went to the bank. Now remember, banks normally lend on the lesser of the purchase price or the valuation. But I was honest and open with the bank and said, I know I'm only paying $170,000 for this property, but that was then. And between buying it and now, I've got a tenant signed up at $30,000 a year, so send your valuer in. They sent a valuer in and said, it's got to be worth at least $240,000. We'll give you a 67% mortgage, which was $160,000. How much cash did I have in it? Bought it for $170,000, mortgage for $160,000, $10,000, right? I had $10,000 tied up. I was pulling out $30,000 a year, about $15,000 going out in mortgage interest. I had $15,000 left over on a $10,000 investment. Isn't that 150% return? It's a phenomenal return. So again, what creativity can you bring to the deal to increase its value? By the way, I've only ever sold 3 properties in my life. One of my golden rules in the back of the Real Estate Riches book is seldom sell. I used to have a rule, never sell, but I thought that's a bit harsh because there are extenuating circumstances. Like when I sold my cottage, I was a real fool then. I didn't realize I should have hung on to it. I was seduced by the $20,000 profit. Oh, and none of you picked me up on the fact that in the beginning I said I'd ask 4 questions. I only ever got around to asking 3. The 4th one goes as follows. You've bought your $100,000 worth of shares for $100,000 cash. It was worth exactly $100,000. You couldn't do anything to increase the value. Let's assume that over time everything's doubled in value. Your shares went from $100,000 to $200,000. What must you do to get some of the benefit of that increase in share value? Sell it. You have to sell, be it a small portion of the portfolio or the whole portfolio. Either way, you have to sell. And in my mind, that is counterintuitive. You've invested in these things to have them grow for your retirement, and then when they have gone up in value, you have to sell and they diminish again. Let's compare that with real estate. You bought that property for $1 million. It was worth $1.5 million. If it also doubled, it would have gone to $3 million, right? It's now worth $3 million. What must you do to get some of the benefit of that increase in value? Refinance. You just go back to the bank and say, remember me? Remember, I'm the one that you didn't think it was worth $1.5 million. But I said, that's all right. Even if you base it on $1 million, just give me my mortgage. Well, it's now gone up in value. Your bank-approved valuer has put a value on it of $3 million. Will you lend me some money on it? What will he say to you? Absolutely, because, in case you haven't got the message, banks want to lend you money. So you still own the property, it's still going up in value, you get the benefit of that increase, even though the banks put up the money. The rental income is still going up in value, you get the benefit of that. Plus, you've got the money that you pulled out. You can use that as a deposit to buy another property or another series of properties. You can just let it grow and grow. So my rule is seldom sell. If you don't have to, hang on to it. People regret selling. People think that in order to make your profit, you have to sell. You've bought a property for $100,000, it's now worth $200,000. Surely you have to sell to get your profit, true or not? No. If it's worth $200,000, then that's what it's worth. You've made $100,000 profit. A way of looking at it is to imagine that every night at midnight you sell your entire portfolio of everything, stocks, properties, you name it. So you sell your $200,000 property for $200,000. You have made your $100,000 profit at that stage. Would you agree? And then at 1 minute past midnight, you buy it back for $200,000. If you wouldn't buy it back for $200,000, then you shouldn't hang on to it in the first place. You should get rid of it. So every night you sell your portfolio for what it's worth and buy it back for that same value. You make your profit the day it goes up in value. There's no need to sell. So a final point I want to share on real estate is, imagine you want to be a share market investor, and many of you will be. How do you know which shares, which sector, which companies are going to go up in the future? How do you know that? Or are you guessing? And my contention is you never know. You're just guessing. You're gambling and guessing that you know better than the market average which shares are going to do well. And a couple of years ago, word was out that technology shares were going to do well. Buy technology stock, they're going to go up. It's no longer bricks and mortar, it's clicks and whatever rhymed with it. Well, we all know what happened to that, right? The dot-coms became dot-bombs, as it's called, and a lot of people lost out. But no one predicted that, or very few. If it's so easy to know what's going to happen in the stock market, then surely people would profit from all those trends. So I want to show you my impression of the stock market. The stock market goes something like this. It fluctuates wildly up and down as time goes on. That's the market on average. If you take any one share in isolation, it may fluctuate even more wildly. That's why you get shares that go up by 1,200% in 1 year, or down by 600% the next year. You get shares that go down so far, the company goes bankrupt, right? Does that happen? Of course it happens. By the way, are there any properties that just go bankrupt in that same sense? They're worth nothing? Absolutely nothing. They just fall. Well, it happens a lot. In fact, the share market indices, the S&P 500 is the top 500 shares. It doesn't take into account the hundreds that go bankrupt every year. In New Zealand, it's the NZSE 40, the top 40. Here it's also 500, right? They're the top shares. Imagine if we looked at the top 500 properties in Australia. How do you think they would perform? So stocks vary very widely. There's a standard deviation, if you like, is very high. When you compare that with real estate tends to fluctuate very gently. And it does go down a little bit sometimes, but generally each peak is higher than the previous peak. Each trough is higher than the previous trough. And when you look at any one property relative to that average, it tends to fluctuate very gently around that. There's not much difference between any one property and the average. Now that is properties in general. I have a question for you. Do you think it would be possible to beat the average in real estate? We've already agreed you can't beat the average with shares. Everyone tries. Mutual fund managers all try, but they don't really succeed. So if I could show you a foolproof method of beating the average in real estate, of doing, say, twice as good as average in Australia, would that interest you? Would that be worth something to you? I mean, let me ask this question. Would it be worth $10,000 to you to know how to beat the average with a very high degree of certainty in real estate in Australia? Who would say it would be worth 10 grand? Wow, thank you. Well, you should see me first before I continue. Who thinks it would be worth 5,000? Fewer people. You guys are weird. Who thinks it would be worth $1,000? Quite a few. So who would like to hear right now for nothing? Okay. Phew, sorry, really, $10,000. Where was I going to get that from? Can I put it on my credit card? I'm going to tell you, it is so simple when I tell you, say, oh, is that all? But I want you to think hard about it, because it's not just, it's that all, it's real. Firstly, let's talk about averages. Do you know that in Australia, half the population is of below average intelligence? Some of you are scowling at me saying, even if that's true, why admit it in public, sort of thing? Half the population is of below average because the other half is of above average intelligence. That's how an average comes about. You take everyone and average them out, all right? So in any indicator, half is below average, the other half is above average. Does that make sense? Yep. Okay. That means that some properties are growing at below average, some are growing at above average. Where would you say there are places where real estate is growing at above the national average? The Gold Coast, right? That's one. Queensland in general. Queensland as a state has a higher growth than the national average. Then there are pockets within Queensland which are growing at way above the state average. That southeastern corner, encompassing the Gold Coast and the Sunshine Coast, and even parts of Brisbane, has phenomenal growth. Has it been like that just for the last week, or has it been like that for a number of years now? A number of years, right? Are there other parts of Australia growing at above the average? What about parts of Sydney? Absolutely, growing above average. What about parts of Melbourne? All right, let me take it out somewhere. Yay, I hear someone say. Imagine you want to invest in America. You haven't really been to America. You don't know about much of what goes on there. But I tell you this fact. Last year, the number one city in the United States for capital growth and population growth was Las Vegas, Nevada. The second one was Phoenix, Arizona. The year before that, the year 2000, numbers 1 and 2 were Las Vegas and Phoenix. The year prior to that, 1999, Las Vegas and Phoenix. Before that, Las Vegas and Phoenix. Before that, Las Vegas and Phoenix. 1996, Las Vegas and Phoenix. Would you have some certainty that for this year, it might also be Las Vegas and Phoenix? Would you bet your life on it? No. Would I bet my life on it? No. Would you bet my life on it? But if they're not numbers 1 and 2, they're likely to be 1 and 3, or 2 and 3, or 3 and 2, or 3 and 1. They're going to be up there. Of the 3,000 cities in the United States above a certain size, they're likely to be in the top cluster, right? Same in New Zealand. Auckland is not the capital. It has the largest population. It's growing at double the national average. At the other end of the country, you've got Invercargill. Between the last two censuses, there was a population decline of 6%. Invercargill's as close to the Antarctic as you can get without leaving the Western world. A lot of people sell their 3-bedroom home in Auckland for $700,000, shift down to Invercargill, buy a bigger, better home for $90,000, put the difference in the bank and spend the interest money on the heating bill. However, they don't tend to do well because the values aren't going up very fast. So the first way to beat the average is using what I call geography. Beating the average. Number one, we'll call it geography. Just buy in the right place. Now, if that was all there was to it, that would be pretty exciting, but I'm going to give you another way of beating the average. And I call it the demographics. The baby boomers, the people who were born between 1946 and 1964. They are now starting to reach retirement age. In the United States, someone turns 50 every 17 seconds. That means in Australia to be about every 4 or 5 minutes. There's going to be a hugely increasing need for retirement homes, rest homes, assisted living facilities, golf courses, all those things. If you can cater for that sector that's growing in size, you will beat the national average again because there's a growing demand for that. Makes sense, right? There's a third way. And that is, I simply call it by the seaside. When we were all kids and we had holidays, where did we all tend to go? Well, we went to the seaside. This works all over the world. In France, where are the holiday resort places? On the Côte d'Azur, on the Mediterranean coast. Same for the Greek islands, anywhere you can think of. In England, Brighton, not New Brighton. Brighton was by the seaside. Same here in Australia. So before, we used to live in cities because we had to live where the work was. But as we get more telecommuting and as this burgeoning mass of retiring people can live anywhere, more and more people want to live by the sea. So if you buy by the sea, it will have a growth rate of higher than the national average. That's because dinky little towns inland where steel mills that have gone into decline and all that sort of thing are located, they have a declining value. So any one of these in themselves can give you a greater than average growth rate. Imagine if you compound them. Imagine if you had one that met all three criteria. I lived in La Jolla for a while. La Jolla is a very ritzy suburb near San Diego. And for those of you who may have been there, there's a seal colony on the beach. As you leave the seal colony and cross the road, you come to a retirement home. This retirement home caters to the right demographics. Geographically, it's in La Jolla, one of the best suburbs in the United States, and it's by the sea. Do you think that that retirement home may have a growth rate higher than the average in the States? It's easy, folks. Same applies here in Sydney. If you've got a house with a view of the sea, it's worth more than one that doesn't have that. If it's got access to the sea, is it worth more? Right. These things sound so simple that when you say them, you think you're kidding yourself. So there are many aspects like that we can cover where we talk about things you can do to increase your chances of making a lot of money. We spoke of depreciation, and I said I'd come back to that. I want to highlight one other thing. People get confused about depreciation. They think, well, as soon as the government finds out that there's this loophole, they're going to close it. Nothing could be further from the truth. Imagine we have a computer. Do computers go up in value or down, by the way? Down. So let's start with a computer that you buy for, say, $10,000. You pay $10,000 for it. Over time, its value goes down to $6,000. Is that reasonable? Yeah, that's about 3 weeks we're talking about there. They never go up anyway. Now, the government, in its wisdom, allows you to depreciate that computer. Why do they do that? They want Australia to be competitive with the rest of the world, so they say, well, since you've spent that money on it, we'll allow a deduction for its probable decline in value, its depreciation. Now, how does it work? Imagine that you end up selling the computer, but you only get $5,000 for it. That means they'll allow you to depreciate another $1,000 because you sold it for less than the book value. Conversely, if you manage to get $7,000 for it, then you have to pay what's called depreciation recovered tax, because you claimed it as if it was worth $6,000, but it was actually worth $7,000. So far, so good, right? Well, let's compare that with a piece of real estate. We're now going to talk about a house. And let's say you buy it for $100,000. And in Australia, we're going to have to add, let's assume it's new, because when you buy a second-hand property, you get a written-down book value. So here's a new house, and you depreciate it down to $60,000. Same thing applies. If you sell it and you can only get $50,000 for it, then you could claim another $10,000 depreciation. On the other hand, if you sell it and get $70,000 for it, then you have to pay depreciation recovered tax. But there are two important differences that I want to highlight between the computer and the house. Firstly, in the case of the computer, did you pay $10,000 for it? Yes, you have to pay for the computer. And secondly, did it or did it not go down in value? It went down. When it comes to real estate, so the purchase price was $100,000. Did you pay $100,000 for it? What if you only paid $10,000 for it? Can you only depreciate 10% of it because you've only got 10% cash in there? No, you can depreciate the whole thing. Even if you put zero money down in it, you just signed a contract to get it. 100% financed. Can you still depreciate it? Yes, you claim that depreciation money. You get that benefit from the government. Now, did it go down in value? No, it's gone up in value. In all probability, it's gone up through the roof. Might be worth $200,000 or $300,000 now. Even though it goes up in value, you can still claim the depreciation. All right? And you only have to repay it, depreciation recovered tax, if you're silly enough to sell. If you never sell, you never have to pay it. It's another compelling reason not to sell. So a lot of this takes time to sink in. I know I can spend a lot of time giving you the facts and figures of how real estate works, and my fear is that you still wouldn't do it. You would walk away thinking, well, that made sense, but you won't do it. So I need to get into your core thinking. I need to share a story with you about what happened to a girlfriend of mine. I had a girlfriend, and her birthday came up. And I thought, well, let me treat her on her birthday. So on the day when it finally arrived, I said, I've hidden your present somewhere in the house. And she got all excited about it and went out looking for it until she found it. And she came to me and thanked me profusely, and we proceeded to have breakfast. And then after breakfast, I said, you know what? I said there was one hidden, but there are actually 3 hidden in the house in total. You've only found the first one. So you can imagine, she got all excited again and went out looking for the other 2 gifts. And she kept on looking till she found them. And when she found them, she came to me and thanked me profusely. And then later on in the day, I said, you know what? I said there were 3, but there were actually 10. And she said, you're kidding me. I said, I'm serious. So she got all excited, and out she went looking for each present. She kept on looking and looking. And as she looked longer and longer, the remaining presents became harder and harder to find. Of course, when I hid them, I didn't know which ones would be easy or which ones would be difficult. But she persevered until she'd found all 10. Now, did she have reason to believe that there may have been more presents? She might have had, but she didn't look for any more. And the reason I'm telling you this story is for the following point that I want to make. When you know there is one deal out there, one present, you will look for it. And then you'll stop looking. When you know there are a total of 3, you will look for them, but then you'll stop looking. When you know there are 10, you will look for them, but then you stop looking. And the problem that you guys face is you don't know how many good deals there are out there. Unless I go out tomorrow and figure out how many good deals there are and phone you each individual and say, well, there are exactly 28 and a half great deals out there in Sydney. I mean, you'd look then, right? You'd want to find them. But you don't know how many there are, so the temptation is not to look. And sometimes you just don't know when you're sitting on a gold mine. In fact, sometimes you're sitting on a gold mine and you don't know it. In fact, one of you is. Taped underneath one of your seats is a $50 bill, but before you look, here are the rules. The person who gets the money won't be the one whose seat it's under necessarily. It'll be the person who finds it. So I want you to find that money, and when you do find it, sing out and let me know you've got it. Has anyone found it? You got it. Oh, congratulations. Big cheer. Let's give her a round of applause. Could you stand up for a moment, please? Now, tell me, why didn't you look under your seat earlier? It's been there all evening.
I had no reason to believe it was there.
You had no reason to believe it's there. Well, thank you very much. Let's give her a big round of applause. Thank you. Is Shalom in the room, please? Shalom, could you step down? And I think you know where you might have to go. Because the thing that really amuses me is I told the story about my girlfriend, and I said, when you know there's one, you will look for one. And when you know there are more, you will look for more. So Shalom, would you mind going into where you need to go? And when you retrieve it, could you hand it over to Shalom, please? Shalom, that is yours. Shalom always puts the money away for me. And the point I want to make, I want you to think hard about this, is I just told the story. I used to tell the story about the girlfriend and the 10 gifts at the beginning of a weekend event, and then at the end of the weekend I'd do this exercise to say there's money under the chairs, and as soon as the first person finds their note, everyone else stops looking, because you're deluding yourselves into thinking that there's only one. And as time went on, I could sandwich those two together. Now I do them back to back. I tell the story about the girlfriend. I say, in fact, one of you might be sitting on a gold mine. One of you is. Underneath a chair, there is the money. As soon as someone shouted, oh, I got it, the rest of you stopped looking. There are 5 more $50 notes hidden under those seats. I want you to think hard about this, because you see, the way we react to these exercises in a classroom style situation, they are exactly the way that you react in real life. If you're not happy with your financial circumstances, ask yourself, could it be because of the way you're reacting to these sorts of things? Someone tells you there's a great deal out there in Sydney. You're in one of the hot spots in Australia. There's more growth here than just about any other place you can think of. What is stopping you from going out to look at these things? Make a bit of money for yourself. They say it's better to give than to receive. Well, that's true. But if you're going to give, you might as well give a lot. And to give a lot, you need to have a lot. All right? Money can't buy you happiness. That's true. But hey, I'd rather cry in a Rolls Royce than in a Mini. Or if you're going to be unhappy anyway, you might as well be rich and unhappy rather than poor and unhappy. Money can't buy you happiness, but hey, it buys the next best thing. You know, for every argument you can come up with to say it's better to be pious and poverty-stricken, there is a counter view. Your poverty will help no one. Your wealth can help many, many people. Perhaps your mission in life is to figure out how you might help more people. I get asked to speak in a lot of places. I get asked to speak on cruise boats, which is a real pain, because I might get to speak for half a day, but the whole cruise lasts a week. But anyway, I was on one of these cruises going up to Alaska, and this woman came to me and asked me to read her diary. Now, I don't know how you guys think about it, but when someone asks you to do that, I think, that's a bit tenuous. So I said, no, I really wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. She said, no, I insist. So with a lot of reluctance, I took her diary and read the first entry, and on Monday the entry read, Dear Diary, tonight the captain invited me to dine at the captain's table for dinner. It was such an honor that I was thoroughly flustered. And I turned the page, and there on Tuesday was the entry, "Dear Diary, tonight the captain invited me back to the captain's cabin for after-dinner drinks. It was really exciting." And then on Wednesday I turned the page, and there was the entry, "Dear Diary, tonight the captain made suggestions unbecoming of an officer or a gentleman." And I turned the page, and there on Thursday was the entry, "Dear Diary, tonight the captain threatened that unless I succumb to his advances, he shall sink the entire ship." And I turned the page, and there on Friday was the entry, "Dear Diary, today I saved the lives of 1,500 passengers." And it's just a story, but the point is this: sometimes you have to do what you have to do. For me, that means going out to buy a piece of real estate. If you do nothing else from tonight, buy a piece of property. You'll curse me in 10 years' time only because I didn't tell you to buy two. Thank you very much. You've been a great audience. Thank you. Thank you.